All right. Well, you're joining us mid conversation here this time on the Story World podcast. We're flying really like crazy tonight. We don't have any notes or anything. We're just going to kind of jam for a few minutes on one of our favorite topics. What's up, Al? You doing all right, man?
Yeah, I'm excited about tonight, mostly because I think it's going to be complete and utter mayhem. We're staring at a blank world document that just says world building on it, and
Yep.
so that's
Yes.
that's where we're going tonight.
I'm really excited. Yeah. So yeah, the topic of the evening is world building, and so when I guess let's just start this way. Like, what is the first thing when I say world building? Now you're a fiction guy. I'm a marketing guy,
Mhm.
but like I wonder what the term world building might mean to somebody if they were hearing it for the first time. Like I wonder how they would because like somebody might be listening to this podcast who like they're interested in story, but they're really not sure what world building is. So maybe we explore that first a little bit. Like what do you think world building is? What do I think world building is, etc.
So the first thing that I think of is token in Middle Earth, and I definitely I think that token over world build. Like the argument is I'm glad that he wrote the Silmarillion and he thought about all those things. It was fantastic. But then a lot of people are saying, hey, if it that's great and all, but think about all the other stories he might have been able to tell if he didn't focus so much on perfecting the world. So
Oh,
there's two sides to that coin. And so that's why when I think and hear about world building, I love it. That's what gets me excited. I like to know like why this city is this way and why these people behave this way of the civilization and how it goes all the way back. But as far as the writing process, the world building gets really into the way and you can get really consumed into that. Doesn't mean that you can't do proper world building, but so that's what I think is building your world, having I guess, a reason or a paragraph or something, even if you don't necessarily explain it to your readers don't need to know everything that happens. But if you have a sense of here's how things are the way it is, that helps one, even if the characters don't know the background, it helps you create realistic characters and settings because it is believable. And so the world building kind of creates
yeah.
that foundation in a way. And it can be either like the physical landscape, it can be a religious sect, it could be like a language that's spoken. World building can really encompass a lot of things for creating your world. So that's what I think of when it comes to world building.
Do you remember the video game Spore?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. That when that game came out, I remember it was supposed to be like, revolutionary, right?
Right.
In the way it approached things. And
I gotta look up what
I
it looked like. It's been a while.
oh, I know, I'd love to see that. Right, so when I think of world building,
Mhm.
that is the very like, probably the very first time that I heard the term was probably in the context of video games. So this is before I knew anything about marketing, before I thought deeply about what it would be like to write fiction, let alone nonfiction or anything.
Mhm.
Was probably with video games. And so my first when I just think of, what maybe I would have used to have thought world building or it's what would have came to mind immediately when someone said the word world building would probably be like what happens when somebody is building a video game, because especially in like, those free for all adventure wander around
Yeah.
games, like where you've got little things that you can do that are maybe not necessarily part of the main mission or whatever. I just think of what it takes to build literally a world where all of those sorts of little things are possible is, I think, just really, fantastic. It's like one of the games that I've been really into lately is Starlink Atlas, which is a Star Fox, game, or at least on the Switch it is. And um it's just really cool because, yeah, you've got the main mission that you're doing, but, like, all along the way, there's, like, little side missions and mini things that are, like, they're not pertinent to the main story, but they are consistent with it, and they plug into it nicely, and it just feels so seamless. And so,
Mhm.
I think it's just really impressive to me that somebody is smart enough to create an entire world, um, of fiction, and I mean, obviously, it's cool with books, right? Because
Right.
you can place yourself there, like you mentioned with Tolkien and the Silmarillion and stuff, like, you can really get into it, But I especially think it's cool with video games because not only do you get into it, but you actually you can't really say physically interact with it, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you actually interact with it digitally, but you actually interact with it.
I definitely want to have a podcast sometime talking specifically about video games. I know we both love video games, and I'm
Yeah.
making one. So as far as being immersed in that world and the different how that affects you playing with it, but as far as the video games are a perfect example of world building, especially as it relates to fantasy. Thinking specifically of RPGs like the Elder Scrolls, Oblivion, Skyrim.
Oh, yeah.
So a player can go in that game, act crazy, chaotic, don't read any of the books or learn any of the history and just go and have fun. But then you have people
Right.
who want to read like the diaries and the journals laying around and understand this village and all the history that the
Yeah.
Elder Scrolls encompasses. And so for a writer, it's a little bit more challenging. So a video game might have, I don't know, anywhere between like 20 and a couple hundred people working on a video game. So you have all these people, we might have one person dedicated to forming the lore of the story, or maybe even two or three, and they write these passages and books that go into it for those people that want to discover more and dig deep into the world building of it. For a writer, you don't really have that luxury. You write a book and you kind of have to either go Tolkien's way and write a Silmarillion that is just pure history of the world and, you know, says how the world got built, or you take the route which is the better way. Well, at least I guess that's an opinion, but it's it's usually the better way of just writing a story with good characters that obviously has some world building into it. You have to have that to have some realism and just understand what's happening. But yeah, video games kind of can offer both routes depending on the genre. So it's an interesting take
Mhm.
on it.
Yeah, I heard, we talk a lot about Brandon Sanderson just because he's such a, influential fiction writer, and he shares his knowledge, and he's one of your favorites, and
Mhm.
he writes in the same genre that you really are spending a lot of time in. And, so he's got some lectures on YouTube about world building, and, this has been months ago now that I watched, one of them. I think there's more than one, but I think I only watched one of them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stuck with me that he said was this concept of depth. Like, you don't necessarily for example, the Silmarillion might itself be one of the best examples that you could point to of, like, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, uh, on their own, I think would have been sufficient, right? In the sense that they sort of did the job of giving the illusion of the world that is described in the Silmarillion, but then in the Silmarillion just goes ahead and goes to that place, and it goes there
Yeah.
and
100%.
it really explains, the inner workings of that world, that history. But right, I mean, obviously, unless you're just gonna bank your entire writing life, right, around one particular world, which I suppose you could do, um, it does seem to make sense to me that you can find sort of a nice depth that kind of picture like the iceberg, the picture of the iceberg you might find if you Google iceberg wallpapers or whatever, where it's like the tip of the iceberg is on top of the water, and then the huge iceberg is underneath the
Yes.
water. I think as long as you just give the illusion that that iceberg continues down, then you're probably
The
good in most cases.
the illusion is enough. I would say, pretty much near all the times in certain circumstances. Like for instance, in Sanderson's book, um, they women in certain areas will wear a glove over one of their hands, and it's kind of like the same thing as like women today, like wearing skirts or covering themselves up. So if like a man in that society sees happens to see a girl with their glove off, it's like they blush and they get it's inappropriate, and he never explains why that is. It's just how that culture is, but the readers don't need to know why. They just know, oh, that's part of that civilization and it works. So that's like an area where there's realism there. That's a culture. That's a real civilization. There's a reason for that. That's how people behave. But then obviously there's other areas in the main story where he does want to provide a background, something about the history of a race and maybe like a god that they worship or how the god interacted with them and slowly bringing that in. So obviously there's main things that you do want to bring into the reader at a time. Sometimes it's a big dump and you blow the reader's mind. Other times it's smaller things. That's but it always kind of follows the plot and advances the plot and characters.
Is there anything This is just my curiosity here because again, you dove into it from a fictional standpoint, whereas I
Yeah.
haven't as much. Is there anything to like? Let's take the white glove thing as an example.
Mhm.
Um, would that device be there intentionally for purposes of maybe curiosity or drawing people in, or like, because what I'm thinking of is it seems to me that, like, if you have little unexplained things like that, that, like, you kind of like let me just give an example from something I know, Star Trek, okay? It Star Trek, right, started in what, the '70s, and all throughout the entire life of the series, it it was just assumed that somehow, right, aliens from distant planets in the deep space and everywhere else could speak English.
Yeah,
Like,
I've heard that,
right?
yeah.
You know what I mean? You had right, because they always moved their mouths the right way, they always spoke English, right, because it was to an English audience, and it's kinda like, how
Yeah.
and you would hear, like, the Universal Translator be referred to, like, rarely. Okay, so this is like the white glove, right? Is you would hear about the Universal Translator, but there was never any, like, what is that? How did it come about? Who invented it? Why, like, what was the context there? Finally, in the Enterprise series in the early 2000s, you literally got to see them, like, you know, literally the person begin to develop the Universal Translator, right? She was this
Mhm.
language specialist who, like, knew, like, tons of languages and understood the patterns, and so she was helping the early days of Starfleet, the early days of the Federation, like, she was actually helping them make these connections with these alien races, and then from sort of as they met more people and integrated more languages, like, the patterns became so broad and predictable
Mm.
that you could basically use this universal translator to communicate with literally any
Right.
species, or alien or whatever, but you didn't learn that until 30 years of the series being in existence. And so I just kind of wonder, is like that's a element for me that was always just a curious thing that just kept me like I always it's almost like I kept watching because one day I was hoping to get the answer and maybe I never
Right.
would. I don't know. But I just
I
wonder if that's ever intentionally used as a device.
I think things
Curious.
like that, and I gotta say this, I said white glove, they might use other color gloves, I forget too, but anyway, I just thought of that. Now I'm curious if they use other
Sure.
color gloves or if it's just white. I might have to read all books again and just to find that out. But anyway,
Right.
um, I don't think, it should be used or is used, um as a marketing way or something interesting to catch a reader's attention. I think it's more to create that realism. So let me give you an example. I've never traveled in Europe, but I just heard that if you travel over there and you order food at a restaurant, they give smaller portions than in the United States. I never like read a book on why or dug down deep into why, even though there's probably a reason. So if you go all around the world and there's different cultures where sometimes that's just how things are. If you go over anywhere in Europe and I think Asia too, they just drive on the opposite side of the road. Well, no one's gonna pull up a well, I probably would pull up a Google and ask why, and I have before, but you don't need a history on that to understand that that culture is different. So just having those differences in a book, especially from a reader's perspective. So if you're switching different characters and say if one of the main characters enters into a different city that he's unfamiliar with, and then he sees maybe buggies with big like canopies roofs on top, and where he's from, they're all open. And he's thinking why, and maybe that could be a traditional thing. It could signify the people riding the carriage. So it's more or less to just, I think it just creates realism in the world. To be honest, I've thought other things in my book. Now sometimes, um, what's really great is when you can have those unique stuff also affect or integrate in like with the story, and if you can integrate the 2, then that's fantastic. But even just having something random like that, that you just think, "Oh, I think it'd be kinda cool if this culture had this, and this is probably why, and that's good enough." You don't really have to think too much, go into too much history on why the women wear gloves. He probably thought of it in 5 minutes and then thought, "Yep, that's good. I'm gonna put that in the book."
Yeah. I like too, and that makes sense to me. I'm thinking back to now Dune when you and I
Mhm.
watched that. I've been dying to watch it again.
I
I
know,
gotta
me too. I know. I got
Oh, man.
it.
Oh, and so it's like, well, and Star Wars does this too. It's interesting, like, in the very intro, I remember in the very intro, dude, um, they had to take about 5 minutes or so to kinda catch you up
Yeah, yeah,
in
yep,
in the world, right? Because there was so much, it's kinda like you couldn't just start from the total clean slate of the world that, like, you're walking into or walking out of. It's almost like if you're walking into the movie theater, like, you're at that point, you're almost walking into a new world and leaving the old world behind, and so there has to be, like, this moment of bridging
yeah,
the gap to get you used to it.
yep.
Um, does the Lord of the Rings do anything like that? I can't remember. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
yeah.
so in the movie, yeah, the movie has a really big intro, that talks about the rings being made, Galadriel's talking, and
That's right.
in
Okay.
the book, I think the book has an introduction like that too, but also the book is kinda written as, like, a historical account, and
Right.
so Tolkien will, like, in his book, like, say, "This is why this is," and the Rohirrim, had this banner because of I mean, I'm just using
Yeah.
just things on the top of my head, but he'll, like, say why something is, even though the characters might not necessarily know it because he's telling the reader, "This is why."
Yeah.
So he does quite a bit of world building throughout his books as well.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
How about from the marketing side of things, Steve? What is world building to you? It's
Well,
probably
funny you
totally
should
different than
ask,
this.
because it just so happened to have here the manual on Worldbook. No, so I just happened to remember, which I'm glad I did, in my February edition of my magnetic marketing letter, the No BS magnetic marketing letter, which everyone should have. Um, the concept they spoke about was creating customers for life, and um, part of that has to do with communication. Now, they don't call it in this resource anyway, that it's not called world building, but that's what they're
Right.
talking about. Um, but there are other marketers. Ben Settle is a good example. There are other marketers who will go ahead and use the terminology. Now, it just happens that Ben Settle is also a fiction writer. Um, so he is a well-known marketer and a fiction writer, and so he's sort of able to cross those 2 worlds, um, and sort of, let you in. One of the examples, so this is written by Dan Kennedy, um, and I've talked about him a couple times now on the podcast, and, he oftentimes in the examples that he'll give whenever he's, speaking on stage or whatever about this concept, he'll often refer to brands like Disney and Apple as great examples of actually doing world building. Um, and really interesting about that is it's actually happening to you, whether or not you realize it. And especially with Disney, it's kind of cool because it's happening in 2 ways, right? Because Disney is built on an empire of fiction, and yet the job of their theme parks is to sort of bring you into that world, right? So when you enter into a Disney theme park, you leave the real world and you're now in the world that Disney has created for you, right? And we've talked about some of this before as well. Even you are literally being manipulated the entire time through smell, through visual design, through you could even say deception if you wanted to cast it in its worst light. For example, there are yeah, like one example of that is the castle. Um, that I'm probably gonna get the specifics of this wrong, but it's something like this. So just don't quote me exactly
Writing
here.
those down.
Good deal. Well, it's something to the effect of like the tall like as as the bricks on the castle in Magic Kingdom, as they get towards the top of the castle, the bricks are made, I think it's longer. The bricks are longer at the top than at the bottom because it gives the illusion that the castle is taller than you think it is. Um, just all kinds of stuff, like little stuff like that, that has been very intentionally designed. And so this is a part of world building. As it gets to specifically into marketing, it has a lot to do with personality and with with character. So like I'm just going to give you, and I'll discuss a little bit of each of these. I'm just going to give you so that the actual main headline here of what he's talking about is a personality and character driven business dissected, right? So he's talking about when you have a business that is based on a character and what Russell Brunson calls an attractive character. um you sort of have a couple of things. So first, it's just that there does need to be a character, right? A guru, a hero, a leader. I mean, Steve Jobs had Apple, right? Disney's got Walt. That kind of thing, right? There has to be somebody um, to follow after, a protagonist. Okay. They also have like legend, right? So there are stories, not necessarily that the character tells, right? That's coming. Um, but there are legends, there are stories surrounding the character. Like for example, Steve Jobs never like told the story of how he was a total butthead to his employees, but
Right.
that's part of the Steve Jobs lore, right? Like because of what people have said about him, um, that if you were around Steve, it was pretty intense, right? And so there is legend, and in fact, I underlined this. Some characters are so great that everybody knows the legend, even if they don't pay attention to the character. Um, Here's some examples. He says, and some additional things here are parables, right? So parables are basically stories that the guru or the hero or the leader teaches in order to cement his thoughts and beliefs about the world. I mean, obviously, the easiest example here is to point back to Jesus, right? But being a person who told stories to teach what he wanted to teach, and everybody kind of understands what a parable is, and so, right, this is if you go back to our marketing podcast episode that we had, I talked a lot about story selling, right? So storytelling in your marketing, and then story selling in your sales. And so when you tell your parables, your stories over and over and over again in your podcasts and your blogs and your YouTubes and your guest things and your whatever, when you have that character driven business and you keep telling your stories over and over again, that gets cemented into the minds of people, and the lessons that they're trying to teach you become more than information. They become very memorable.
So is is the world building then kind of, I guess, trying to create the image that you want people to think when they hear your company or your product? Like, for instance, like when I hear the word Tesla, I actually don't even think of Nikola Tesla. I think of I
Elon
think of
Musk.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And I think of him and he's just
Mhm.
kind of a funny looking guy. It just, this is just kind of a little something awkward about him. But I usually think of him in an interview, kind of like doing a weird smirk about something, and then I picture like a rocket blasting off, and I think about the AI technology behind the cars. And then I usually think about how it wasn't that long ago that they were
Yeah.
really nowhere, and then they just boom got popular. So yeah,
Yeah.
all that stuff just kind of floods me in the span of a couple seconds. So is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, is what the persona you want people to think of when they hear your voice?
Yes. So from page 10 of
Oh,
the
here we
exact
go.
same
Yeah.
letter, and I quote, "The most valuable car company is Tesla. I think currently its market valuation is equivalent to Ford, GM, and Chrysler added together. And why?
That's it.
There's no investment fundamentals to argue for it. It is so because of Elon Musk. And what do the other companies not have? They don't have Elon Musk. They've all got electric cars, and they're pumping out more models, more variety, more selection. Ford's got electric trucks. Furthermore, they have got a dealership network, which Musk does not have. They have service departments, which Musk does not have, which is a problem. As we record this, he just recalled 500,000 Teslas, and they can't be fixed by sending everybody a computer chip. They got to be fixed by a real person. Um, some other companies have a lot of stuff that Tesla doesn't have, but they don't have a Musk. There's nobody on Twitter, nobody having a big like Steve Jobs reveal event. Nobody. And what's important is not only that don't they have that, but Musk has a philosophy. It's a little random, it's a little erratic, but he has ideas he's talking about, not just cars. And pretty much everything he's doing is visible. There aren't many real secrets to it. But here's the key. But now go to a local market. Go to Boise or go to Cleveland or even go to a bigger market. Go to LA and find me a local car dealer who is playing the game the way Musk is playing the game. You won't find one, you just won't. And that's dumb. End quote. Right? So uh right. When you create a persona, right? Now, some people are just naturally interesting. Other
Right.
people have to sort of be interesting, right? You can't. It's like the number one rule here. You can't be boring, right? You sort of have to either be interesting naturally or fabricate an interesting dynamic, of your character. Um, but right, Tesla is not just it's not just a good car, right? When somebody buys a Tesla, they're buying into Elon Musk.
Yeah.
They're buying into the spaceman's vision, right?
Mhm.
Into the we're gonna freaking colonate Mars
It's interesting because,
vision.
like, if you go out, obviously, it's a long time ago, and so it makes sense, but at the same time, it's odd how if I go out and say if I wanted to buy a Ford F-150 or something, I'm not buying it because of Henry Ford. I buy it because of its utility or something, but you're right. I mean, there are other reasons why I want to buy a Tesla, but the main reason is because they're so cool, and I wanna be kind of a part of that company, like, feel like I'm really invested in it, and
Exactly.
it's it's obviously it's pretty clear that to successfully build your world, with marketing for either your company or yourself, having that person is extremely critical and at the very least useful. So what happens if Elon Musk dies tomorrow or
Right.
gets old, fades away, or goes crazy and leaves the company? Does what happens to that world building that Tesla has gone really wholly because of Elon Musk?
Yeah, sure. It's a fantastic question. It may be answered a little bit more by some of the things that I have to say coming up here,
Mhm, okay.
but there is a practical example you can look to. Steve Jobs died in 2011,
Mm, mhm.
and I mean, I think it's still accurate that Apple is the
Yeah,
highest valued company on the planet right now,
yeah, for
right?
sure.
So my God, Walt Disney
Mm, mhm.
died in the 80s or 70s. When I think it was like the late 70s, right? And no, it was probably the 80s. I can't remember exactly, but the vision that Walt had was so big and so gigantic, and the lore so great that and right, and the world so great that it was able to extend beyond him. As long as it's put in the care of someone who understands
Mm,
the vision. Now, Disney's an interesting example, and I'm a huge Disney fan, so we'll try not to be here for 3 hours, but Disney's a good example, and I might have mentioned this before, but it's worth reiterating. They Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, the initial vision for Epcot was not the Epcot that you go see today in Disney, right? The initial vision for Epcot was to be a self-contained community of tomorrow where basically you came into the city and the city was it was like it was designed it had a certain design around it that would make it an optimal kind of community. All the transportation was done underground, right? So it wasn't so there was no interruption or whatever. Like the idea was basically Walt wanted to take the very best of American industry and see if we could literally create you know s- sort of little mini utopias. um and so a city like Charlotte near us, for example, instead of being, the way it is now, just basically a big overgrown conglomeration of a small town where stuff just kept getting glommed onto it and glommed onto it. And then certain areas go by the wayside because they're not well maintained. And, I mean, it's the story of every big city. It's why we just came from Atlanta this weekend. It's why Atlanta is, one block looks great and the next block looks
mhm,
like a freaking dump. Um, because it because stuff is happening to it versus the vision of the community happening to the
mm.
people within it.
That's
And so
interesting.
Yeah, and so Walt wanted to turn that around. Now what's interesting is when Walt died, um, even though other people understood what he was trying to do, nobody else, even Roy Disney, his brother, nobody thought that they would be able to see the vision through and do what Walt really wanted, justice. So what they decided to do was instead make Epcot the theme park, to be a place where people came to experience the vision of the future and to understand Earth's past, Earth's present, and then the potential future of the Earth. And so that and then so half of it, it's called Future World. Half of it is this, which they're doing a lot of updating to now, thank God, because it was kinda like, you know,
Sorry
for a
about that.
while well, for a while, it was really like, it's like you would go into, like, the Tomorrow, land, the area where it was supposed to be, like, this big innovation, like, these innovations, and, like, at the time, it was, like, 2015 was the last time I was there. I mean, I was literally wearing stuff on my wrist
Right.
more advanced than some of what they were talking about, so,
Yeah.
like, everybody knows it needs an update, so they've been updating it, thankfully. I haven't been back yet, but I want to go. So anyway, half of it is devoted to, like, what the future would be like theoretically, and then the other half is devoted to what's called the World Showcase, um, which is basically like, puts, most of the main countries of the world that you France and Germany and,
Yeah.
Great Britain and all of that. It kinda gives you little mini countries that you go around the lake and this world showcase. And, right, and so the idea is just to the idea was to extend Walt's vision, and so when they finally opened up, I think it was the Magic Kingdom in the '80s that they were opening up, and, the reporter comes and asks Roy, "What do you think about, Walt missing this?" Like, "What a shame that Walt died before he got to see it, what do you think he'd say?" or whatever, and he told the reporter, like, "Well, the problem is that you got this all backwards." He's like, "Walt already saw this. Like, he saw all of this already. You only get to see it now because he saw it then."
Mm.
And, and so that was a very long answer to your question. If Elon dies tomorrow, that would be a shame, number 1. Number 2, I think he has done enough work to cast the vision that if somebody responsibly carried it on from this point, I think it could be done. Um, but, the frustrating thing about people like Musk is he's one of those who doesn't even try. To be honest, he's just naturally interesting because of where his mind goes,
Yeah.
right? Like, he'll get on Joe Rogan or just whatever, and he's just a
He's just
smart
interesting.
dude
Yeah.
who's just interested in. I mean, he wants to, yeah. I mean, yeah, he started a freaking space company to populate Mars, and if you listen to him talk, he's like, whenever people even talk about this grand stuff or whatever about, like you might even think about it as world building type stuff, he's just kind of like, oh, I'm just like, I don't even make a lot of, I mean, obviously he does make a lot of money, but it's mostly in stocks and shares and stuff
Mhm.
like that. He's like, I'm not in it for that. I work long hours and whatever because I truly want to make a difference. Um,
Yeah.
so does that answer the question? I think it could be right. Disney and Apple are really two really good examples of
Yeah.
the vision can be if in the right hands, the vision can be carried beyond the initial character. Um, that's one way to think about it. One way I've heard Russell put it too is a lot of times your clients in a services based business or whatever, your clients could eventually become the attractive character. It's almost like an evolution. Like when
Mm.
you start, you know, when you get started, a lot of times you're talking about yourself and your own stories. And then you sort of make a natural transition to sharing stories of your clients and customers. And then depending on the kind of work you're doing, where it gets like really crazy is when you can start sharing about the results and the success of your clients or your customer's customer. And that's kind of where it gets, I don't know, it gets a little crazy, but it gets kind of cool. Um, Real quick, because we've been talking about this for a while. So right, you've got legend, you've got parables. Another thing you have is miracles, right? The guru has to be known for making some kind of miracle happen. I totally think this fits the Musk scenario, right?
Mm,
Like the dude figured out how to make rockets reusable. e- And what he's working on right now is trying to figure out the situation where a spaceship takes some people to orbit or to wherever it needs to go, comes back and is ready to go for another launch in 3 hours. That's what he's
crazy.
working on right now. And so that's the idea. Right, he's making miracles happen, and so usually the guru in whatever business or whatever is going to be known
Mm,
for some kind of miraculous turnaround or whatever. Um, this is a big one. This is a big one. Insider language. Okay, anytime you have a world building, character based business, you're going to have insider language. You're going to have things that are known only to people in the world that are not necessarily known to people outside of the world. Um, Starbucks has done this very, very well, right? Starbucks has their own language. They have their own world, right? Like you can't go into Starbucks and order a large coffee. They'll look at you like you're crazy because you're there to get a venti, right? Like that's the thing. Like you got insider language that you can use to get people removed from the world they're coming from and into the world that you have. Tolkien and I feel like we're gonna just say his name differently every time now as a joke.
yep,
Uh,
we are.
but Tolkien, whatever. Um, Middle Earth. That's insider language, right? Like whenever anybody says, like, so Dr. Mike Heiser, who you and I have talked about before,
Mhm.
um, he refers to certain branches of Christian weird belief as Christian Middle Earth. You'll hear him use that terminology, right? And so everybody who's familiar with Tolkien, which is so many people, like, I mean, because Lord of the Rings, especially with the movie, and it's so popular that most people know they get the reference of Middle Earth, but it's insider language. And so you can actually like that language has become so um gripping and so full of meaning that you can literally just say something like Christian Middle Earth and you sort of get an idea for what that might mean based on your perception of what Middle Earth is. And so that's really important. And then um oh, this is a good line to underscore all of that. People behave fundamentally the same wherever they are, they want to be in the other place. And so this is about creating a place through insider language that when someone reads it and hears it, they no longer feel like an outsider. Right. So you're bringing people in, you're making them feel like they belong. Disney's got magic bands. You go in, you know what like if you know what a magic band is and does, you're in the know, right? If you don't know what it is and does, you're not in the know. So it's very important to create that in order to make a distinction between the worlds. And then sort of the final two things that they list here are dogma and testimony. So dogma is the foundation, the fundamental beliefs, the laws, the principles, the rules. Um, Great characters stand for things and stand against things. And a good example of this is Basecamp. I use a software tool called Basecamp. Basecamp is also the name of the company. And they started out as a web design business in 1999. And now today they still run a strong product business. And their authors are known. I would say Dogma is one of the biggest things that they have going for them. They share their ideas. They clearly state what they're against and what they're for. Um, and that draws a particular kind of person to them and has staying power and loyalty, and you begin to even adopt their language. They do insider language very well, um, also. Okay, and then finally, testimony. So people who are running around singing praises of the character and the miracles that they have created for them. So again, it has to be a character. He'll have some legend associated with him. He's going to tell parables. There's going to be miracle stories associated with him. There will be insider language, dogma, and testimony. So those are sort of the things in marketing that you can use to create a world. And again, there's more to it that you can go to in different angles, but those are like the core fundamental elements that as you're trying to build a world in marketing, you should intentionally be trying to do those things.
That's interesting. I, uh, the connection that I'm making, how I was trying to look at like similarities, because we're talking about really, we're kind of talking about two different things. When I talk about world building, I'm talking about how you create a literal world in your fantasy building. You're talking about creating a world based on what people think about when they think about your company or your person or your product. And but this similarity is interesting as far as like where you were saying when you go into a Starbucks, you don't order a large, you order a venti. And so I usually still will just order a large because I don't care. But stepping into that, someone who's actually serious about ordering correctly will step in and be like, oh, I'm at Starbucks. I'm gonna order a venti because that's what I want. And it places you in that world. And so the similarities that I see is, at least for me, I think a lot of fantasy readers is when they pick up a book and read it, they want to feel like that they're a part of that world and that world is real to them. At least that's what really captures me. I know it captures a lot of readers too, is they don't want to see a flat setting, flat characters. They want to be able to read it and say, wow, I'm like, okay, here I am. I'm fully fleshed in it when I open up that book. Just some similarities
Yeah.
out of there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there are right. I mean, you definitely have to there are definite similarities. For example, like a Dogma. Let's take Dogma, right? Like any when you're in Tolkien's universe, there are rules, there are laws. You talk about magic systems. There are boundaries that I've heard Sanderson talk about this, right? That there are boundaries that like he wants to make sure to intentionally create rules and laws and things because if anybody could just violate at any time, then it's not real. Like it doesn't
It's
feel
not real.
real. Um, and um, so, a good example of that level of immersion is I mentioned the base camp guys. So, like, one of the things that they're known for is taking a stand against like meeting culture, right? So they believe in asynchronous communication and they built their tool to support that, right? And so it's like, in one of their books, you're going to come across a chapter that the title of the chapter is Meetings Are Toxic, right? And so now what's the point? Well, anybody can say that, but these guys say it, believe it, live it, and even build their tool to support it, right? To support asynchronous communication instead of, constantly being bogged down with meetings. And why is that? Well, it's because they believe that employees are ultimately the most productive when they are given uninterrupted long stretches of time to do great work. And so
Side note there, I was in a 2-hour meeting the other day at work and that was
it won't it drain you? It will
and the
legit drain you.
and the whole time I was thinking this is 2 hours worth of work that I'm not doing right now.
Exactly. And how expensive is that for the business owner? Like, my
Oh
God,
my goodness.
know?
Especially for the dough they're paying me. Oh man, Steve.
Right? I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you were talking about the company and how they, that's what they're implementing. That's what they do. The first company that I worked for was Georgia Pacific, who's owned by Coke, not COKE, but KOCH. And they have, honestly, I forget what it's called now, but they have this business model in there where they used terminology referencing like principled entrepreneurship and like different decision making, just different concepts that are normal words that we all use, but they applied it different way. And there were people that are hired. Their job in Coke is to go around to all the plants in the company and give seminars on the mindset of the company and how they think. And so I remember I flew out to the Coke headquarters and for like a training thing for a lot of like newer, younger employees. And it was all and not in a cultic way at all, but just a very like here is what the company believes and here is how we think about business and here is and it was its own little world. So by the end of it, if someone were to walk in the middle of it and just kind of heard talking, they'd kind of be lost just by the terminology and lingo and
Exactly.
the application. So I definitely see what you mean. And it felt kind of cool. Like, oh, this is like we're all like in this mindset together of how we approach business.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, right, so yeah, of course it looks different. Like again, the dogma of base camp might be meetings are toxic, whereas the dogma in Brandon Sanderson's world is whatever, they wear colored gloves and that right. But it's the same kind of thing. So like I like for example, me, I have a belief myself that taking, like, I have the belief that meetings are toxic. Like, I don't like meetings
Yeah,
because
I'm the same way.
right? But see, for me, I have that belief because I'm part of this world that has this belief. And so, like, for me to just love meetings would be out of character or out of step with this world that they have created that I am in. Now, it just so happens that like there are other like for example, um one of the things that they take a stand on is that they're really against taking VC money, right? Venture capital is bad,
Interesting.
bootstrap is better. And so it's interesting that Russell Brunson is also like really big in that camp. And so it's really interesting. Like you tend to be around people who hold those like once you're in one of their worlds, you sort of like you find yourself to be more compatible with people who have similar elements in their world.
Hmm.
Um, and so it is a powerful concept, and I think it is a related concept, even if it looks a little different in terms of creating it. But I think there are still, I mean, it's like you could I'm just remembering back to that lecture of Brandon Sanderson's that I was listening to when he was talking about some of the different elements. I think that you could pull, and sometimes it may be abstract, but you could probably go through all of the different elements of world building that he listed, which I'm pretty sure it was like him and his students, and they were like brainstorming and writing it on the whiteboard. And there was like 40 different aspects of building a world that he was talking about. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you could probably do something very similar and even find relation between those concepts as to how you could do it in the real world, because what you're talking about doing, make no mistake, I mean, it's easier when you have a physical location like Disney, then you can
Right.
really but even if you don't have that, you're just bringing them into your world through information and content marketing. It's still very, very, uh, possible. And, like, one of the simple ways to do that is just to take frameworks and repackage them as your own. For example, when you come into my world, you know what crest is because I'm gonna talk about it. Now, nobody else, like, no other marketer has this, even if they do similar things, because it's my thing, right? It's my process. It's my thing that I do with clients is take people through a conversion-based website, review and reputation management, email marketing, smart content, targeted advertising. That's my way, that's my framework that repackages what other people talk about, but talking about it in a way that makes people resonate with me. And so just even putting your it's kinda like you mentioned with Georgia Pacific and Coke, like, even just putting your own names on things that are well-known concepts is a way to do this. So it gets really interesting, but that's from a marketing perspective in general, that's what I think of when I think of world building, is intentionally crafting these different elements that attract people to you and then make them stay for long periods of time.
We've already talked about selling yourself, so I guess it kind of crosses over. But man, the same principles can be applied to just you in your personal life, whether it's to help further your career or how you want peers to understand you. But just being as purposeful as you can, and not in a fake way, but in a real way of communicating with people the world that you want to present to people of who you are and how you operate.
Totally.
It just seems like it just transfers over there completely.
Well, right. No, I mean, it totally does, and this is where I think people are I think there might be a danger of somebody thinking, "Oh my gosh, world building, that sounds like such a hard thing to do." Well, you kinda do it naturally. I think it's harder to do if you're thinking about it, intentionally, but it's like, for me, part of the world I've built is a world in which things like the ketogenic diet get talked about, music is gonna come up a lot in my world, marketing is gonna come up a lot in my world, and so I attract people to me who are interested in those things, and I repel people who are not interested in those things. Nobody is coming to me to talk about basketball or football or baseball. It ain't gonna happen because they know that's not my world.
Yeah.
But people who can talk music and theology, Bible and and marketing, like these are people who are gonna be drawn to me because that's the kind of person I've set myself up
And
as. It's the same thing.
I don't do this. I'm just saying it because it's just a good idea. I think we all should, but get the people who are close to your life, obviously your spouse, but like any close friends as well, especially in or even people that are getting to know you and say, "Hey, like, when when you think of me, what do you think of me?
Yeah.
What comes across your mind?" Just to get I mean, you do that in the business when you're trying to market things and try to create that, that brand and that world. And then also like in a writing group, I'm sure maybe Brandon Sanderson just sends it off to his editor, but at least authors starting out want to have a few family members read it and say, hey, how does this sound? Does this seem believable? Does this seem real?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah, I think I don't think maybe that's a topic for another time, but just asking people what they think of your story. You know your story because it's in your mind, but how often do you sit down and purposely tell people what story is in your head? People might have a different outlook on your life story and who you are. And
Right.
I don't know, just an interesting thought.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and it all just I don't know, it all just kinda ties together. It's like, again, I'll just, kinda reiterate this, that the world is built on stories.
Hmm.
It just is, right? That's why we're talking about
Yes,
this,
absolutely. And
and so it's no surprise to me that intentionally doing this for your business works because it works in your life. It works in your entertainment. It works in fiction. It works in video games. It works in all these places. Why wouldn't it work in your business too? So that's the way that. But most people don't think of it that way. Um, so that's why it's important.
I think this has been a really good and helpful episode. And with no
Yeah,
notes
man.
either.
I know. I know. I kind of like this though. Because I thought about things that I probably wouldn't have thought about if I was taking notes just off the
Yeah.
fly, being
Yeah,
curious.
sometimes the note structure helps a little bit, but I think this was a really good one and all off the fly.
For sure. For sure. Should we do stories of the week? Are we ready for that? Or do you
You
have
know
any other
what?
thoughts on
I
world
don't
building?
know. I'm sure that we'll probably have another podcast on the road specifically about like dedicated to fictional world building and how I do it, and then another one for you. But so I think my thoughts are good on that. You can go first because I have to think of my story of the week. I actually haven't thought of so go,
Oh, gotcha.
but I'm
Okay,
sure you can come
cool.
up with something.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, let's see. So I'll pick this one. I've got a running list of them. Um, um, Elon Musk, since we're talking about him.
Perfect.
Um, I thought it was cool that, unfortunately, as we're recording this, there's this whole conflict going on with Russia and Ukraine, and they're in the middle of war right now, unfortunately. And I think it was legit on social media that people called out for Elon Musk to support Ukraine um, as they were losing their internet um, with his Starlink satellites.
Mhm.
And, if you don't know, Starlink is a attempt at creating a global satellite-based internet system such that you could literally get internet pretty much anywhere in the world, right? That's just one of the interesting things that Musk wants to do. And so they all the time, these launches that they send up have like 50 satellites in them, and, uh, and they're launching these things all the time. And, so Musk did it, right? I mean, he legit sent his satellites over there. Now, my understanding is I don't know for sure that he made them active. I think there was something about like he was positioning them and going to be ready to make them active if he absolutely needed to. Um, but it just kind of well, number one, I mean, it's a cool humanitarian story. But it's also just in my opinion, a rah capitalism kind of story. Where
Well,
it's
I
like,
was just gonna say, all he had to do was snap his fingers and it was done.
right,
Like
right,
there's
right,
no change holding
exactly,
it back or things you had to go through. It's, "Oh, I wanna help these people with this." Boom,
yeah.
it's done.
Well, it's really interesting. People talk about social programs and the rich and whatever. People just don't realize that the people with the money and the power like that have the ability to do actual good in the world, and they often do it. They're just unsung heroes a lot of the time, right? And so it's like,
Yeah,
right, like call him whatever, call him a greedy capitalist or whatever, but because of his work and because of his position, Elon Musk could just be like, "Frick yeah, I'll send you some satellites." Snaps his finger,
I
and there's satellites positioned over Ukraine, ready to go to give internet to people who need it when
I
they need it.
I think the tweet that he sent back literally said, "Done."
Exactly,
And then
exactly,
when it
right?
arrived, like, the next day or something, he said, like, "All is good, all is done, you're all set," and then they work. That's the thing is they work too, and so they got it, so
Exactly.
that was a really
Ex
cool story.
I think it's neat. I think it's neat, and I think it's just yeah, I mean, I believe in the power of capitalism and the free market, yada, yada, yada. Yep, I believe it. I believe in it because it's helpful and it helps a lot of people, when in the right hands.
That's a good story. So mine, I'm actually really excited. So I grew up in Maine, and soccer wasn't too big up there. It's bigger down south. I remember when I went to college in Florida, soccer was really big down there. There is the New England Revolution team in Boston. Never got a chance to go and watch them. It was 3.5, 4 hour drive away. But now living close to Charlotte, they got Charlotte FC that just had their opening night, and it was really cool. There were several videos of usually they usually play in football stadiums, and they're
Yeah.
usually like half full. Well, the opening night, it was packed. Every seat was sold out,
What?
and they had like fireworks go off at the start of it, and it was just really exciting. So, I guess not much of a story per se, but just really excited that there's a local, excited, area for soccer, and hopefully to go watch them play at some point. But it was cool. The video showing everyone singing the national anthem. I'm not too big on like national loyalty to the hardcoreness that some people are, but it was just cool
Right.
seeing everyone together and enjoying their time and singing out, and it was just really neat.
So are you so you're a soccer fan?
Yeah.
I did not know that. It's so
No,
hard.
not to
Like,
the extent of like some people, like I want to be into it more. But yeah, especially in college is when
man.
I played it a little bit as a kid, but not too much. But especially in college, I really got into it a lot.
Well, I would right. So I mean, when I was younger, I used to be obsessed with soccer. Like it was honestly one of my obsessions. And soccer is like there's a lot of people in the US, soccer is almost treated like cheerleading, right? Like it's just barely a sport.
It's getting
Um
popular.
It is getting more popular. But like overseas though, soccer is like legit like what American
Yeah.
football is here. Like
Yeah.
soccer is a big deal
Oh yeah.
in other places. So I would love we should go to a soccer game together. That
Let's
would
go.
be
Yeah. Well.
so much fun
Yeah.
'cause
We'll go
I
watch.
love soccer.
Yeah, we'll go down there and watch it. I saw some videos and like really good view from the stands, and it looked like the crowd was
Sweet.
really into it. So
Is that the MLS team? Is
yep.
that the
I think there's like 20 some
okay.
teams now in the MLS.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
getting, I said it's getting more popular, which is good. I want to be more popular.
I think it's a great sport. Let's do it. Let's
It's so
totally go
fun.
sometime.
Cool. Excellent.
Sweet. All right, man. This has been great. Just everyone, I would just say, number one, thank you for listening. We're excited. You know, listenership is growing little by little every week, so we're excited about that. And I mean, the best thing you can do again to get the word out on this podcast, share it with your friends. Literally, take a screenshot of your podcast player on your phone, share it, tag us in it on social media if you want to. Tag your friends in it. Say, hey, check out this awesome podcast. We're not doing it just for the fun of it. We're doing it to help you also. So um, I would encourage you to do that. Any final thoughts?
No, well said. Well said.
Sweet. Well, we'll see y'all next time.
See ya.